Hey everybody, Dr. Rob Silverman here. I've got an esteemed colleague to share some tremendous insights with me today, Dr. Brian Jensen. Doc, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's really good to be with you. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. We caught up. We were some keynote speakers at Northwestern Health Sciences. It's a chiropractic school, but it's really it is health sciences. They have acupuncture, nutrition, and all that. And we got to talking, and wow, you really blew my mind on all the things that we could talk about. Some of the most basic items, and really you could expand upon them. So I got you to come on. I really appreciate you taking time, and we're going to talk about proactive steps towards health. But let me tell everybody, the listeners, who you are. Were introduced to chiropractic at age 15 when you received treatment for sports injuries. I must have said this a bunch of times. Everybody, chiropractors are chiropractors because they were treated by somebody else and motivated to do the same through a life's mission. Based on the treatment and the success of that treatment, you attended Palmer College of Chiropractic, where you graduated in 1987. So if my math is correct, you got about 35 years experience in chiropractic.
Yeah, I was 10 years old when I started.
Yeah, there you go. Outstanding. So you practice in the Cave Spring area of Virginia. And as we talked about, you're frequently asked to share your experience and knowledge with other doctors in continuing ed seminars in the U.S. abroad. I'm happy to have you on. And let's dig in. Let's address some structure, stress, and healthy movement. So what are some of the things you look for in a patient?
Well, I just had a new patient walk in the door, and I can see them through the glass at the front of my office as they're walking from the parking lot up to my front door. And first thing I look at is, how are they walking? You know,
okay. So Dr. Jensen froze a little bit. No problem. What he was saying was he just had a new patient.
Oh, there we go.
And he was looking. You froze a second. So what we got was he walked in the door, and you were about ready to tell everybody how you analyzed what was going on.
Yeah, I watched their feet. Do their feet hit the pavement in the same direction? Does he have a limp? What's his posture like? Is his head forward? Just little things. Is there a difference in how the arms swing back and forth? And it's not that I'm analyzing all these things, but I'm just looking to see, how do they move? And if they're not moving symmetrically and easily, I know that there's some structural things going on. I look at the feet a lot. I had a lot of sports injuries growing up, and nobody ever looked at my feet. By the time I was 25, I had low back pain all the time. And someone finally looked at my feet, and they realized that one foot was a little bit different than the other one. So one knee worked a little bit differently than the other one. One hip worked a little bit differently than the other one. And most of our patients have that classic pelvic twist a little bit, where one hip goes backwards, one goes forward just a little bit. But you add millions and millions of steps and trauma and exertion from work and exercise, and those imbalances create inflammatory responses, which we call pain. And in this country, we're really big on treating pain. I mean, watch any TV show, and there's all sorts of ads for pain relief for this and pain relief for that. And we're really good about covering up the symptoms, but we never get to the cause of the problem. And so for me, my aha moment as a 25-year-old brand new chiropractor was that, my gosh, my feet have been part of the problem the whole time. No one's ever looked at them. And so I got some of these custom orthotics that go on the shoes, and within a week, my back pain was gone. Mm-hmm. And these are very specialized orthotics that were made by a chiropractor 70 years ago that address things that chiropractors look at. It's balance. It's how we move. And when you eliminate that part of the equation, it changes the pain picture as well. Because we know that when a joint is fixated, malpositioned, subluxated, whatever the words are that chiropractors use to describe that, it stimulates a neurological reflex that can cause pain. And when we put motion into a joint, we adjust it or we reposition it, it stimulates a different type of sensor that inhibits pain and turns on a muscle response, which changes posture and how we move and those types of things. So that's really where I start. I don't care if it's a shoulder problem, a headache problem. I want to see if structure is part of that problem.
That's fascinating. So again, you believe a lot of movement starts at the foot. Makes Absolutely. A lot of sense. That's what's contact with the ground all the time. And I'm going to ask you a few questions on what you're looking for in the foot.
Yeah.
Obviously, problem with their gait, the way they move, pronation, inversion, stuff of that nature, leads you down a path of lower back pain. That leads to this inflammatory response, leads to pain. And obviously pain's a problem because everybody comes in to the doctor and says, can I have the bullet for pain? And not looking at what the cause is.
Right.
Not trying to get to the root cause. And it's a big problem in America. Number one, we're too inflamed. And number two, we're not worried about the long-term health as a population base.
Yeah.
So that said, can you give us a little bit of what you're looking for in the foot?
The thing that I started doing 35 years ago is I looked at the difference between the foot in a non-weight bearing position and a weight bearing position. And there's a bone on the inside arch of the foot called the navicular bone. And we can actually measure how much that foot flattens out from a non-weight bearing position.
So having a little technical difficulties. He'll be back in a sec. He's talking about the navicular. He's talking about how the foot moves. There we are.
Yep.
You were up
There
to
we
the
go.
navicular.
Sorry about
I had a little issue. Yep.
Yeah. You can actually put a mark on the side of the foot with a ballpoint pen. And I had this card that I would slide up against the foot, transfer the mark to the card. Then I have the patient stand up, and that foot will basically flatten out. And then I put the card against the foot and I measure how much does the foot flatten out. Okay. And it's not really how much it does that's the big important thing. It's the fact that the right one and the left one are different. Okay. And so we use an orthotic that creates a symmetrical foundation for the feet. So now the feet do the same thing regardless of how much they're flattening out. And that pretty much eliminates a lot of the gait distortions, the foot flare, the knee rotation that we see, and a lot of that twist in the pelvis disappears when we flatten out the feet or when we stabilize the feet. And go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. When you talk about an orthotic, I think one, let's define what it is. And number two, tell exactly what the orthotic is doing, how it's repositioning the foot to be more functional.
Yeah. The product I use is very specialized. Foot Levelers has been around for 70 years now. Dr. Monty Greenawalt wanted to address all three arches of the foot. So we've got that navicular arch, that medial arch that we can all see. And patients tell me all the time, I know I have flat feet because of that arch. But there's an arch on the lateral part of the foot, and then that one that goes across the toes. So we've got three arches. And I tell patients it's kind of like a ligamentous shock absorbing spring is what the bottom of the foot is. What's really interesting is that the orthotics that we use have three little bumps on them. And those three little bumps put pressure on the muscles that go up the bottom of the foot on the inside and the outside and then across the toes. And it stimulates a reflex. And that's what's missing in almost every other orthotic product out there. There's a million of them, but they don't stimulate that neurological reflex where we're sending information to the brain and the brain sends a reflexive signal to the muscle in the rest of the body. And that's where I start to see changes in functional movement. This guy I had in here a couple minutes ago, older guy, had some pretty severe injuries in his life. And he described to me, he's 62 or so. And he says, I feel like I'm losing my balance and my coordination. I can just feel it getting my range of motion. I'm getting stiffer all the time. And I had him just do a little squat like he was sitting in a chair, on the floor with no shoes on. And he almost fell down and his heels came up off the ground and his knees flared way out. And then I had him stand on some sample orthotics and he squatted down almost perfectly with the heels on the ground. And he went a lot lower and he stood up and his eyes just kind of lit up and he couldn't believe what had just happened. When we tap into the neurology as chiropractors, like we do, when we understand this better than anybody, we can engage reflexes that change function. And that's really, I think, a foundational thing, at least in my practice. And I think it should be for everybody because we're all fighting gravity. We're all fighting a little bit of asymmetry. We're all fighting this aging process, the repetition, the millions of steps that we've taken over time. It takes a toll. And I tell people, you can't unboil a hard-boiled egg, but you can stop cooking it. right?
That's great. That's a great one. That's a great
And maybe make something nice out of it,
one.
But we can help anybody function better than they are, I think, with rare exception.
Outstanding. So the body's all interconnected. So I've got a couple of texts coming in.
Yeah.
Text number one, they did this kind of emoji, like their head was blowing up because they, wait a minute, my foot communicates with my brain because the body's all interconnected. Now, I don't want to go through the full neurology, but like you said, it's a reflex. So information from your foot makes its way to the brain and the brain responds. So it's up afferent and down efferent. It's fabulous. So the orthotic helps reposition the three arches, like you said. And by doing so, you get a proper feed. So he asked something. He said, I have a big toe issue. Would that adversely affect my gait and my reflex?
It will. And here's why, because the body will compensate to protect that toe. So it's going to recruit muscles that it wouldn't normally use for gait to protect that toe. So it's going to turn the foot out. It's going to shift weight to the opposite side. It's going to do a lot of different things. And what happens with repetition, it's just like learning to play an instrument. I don't play any instruments right now, but you start out playing the piano or the guitar or whatever it is, and you're horrible at it. But with repetition, we create these reflex patterns between the fingers and the brain. Okay. It's called a new neural network. And so we become what we practice the most. And that works with musical instruments. It works with
guys, just stay there a sec. He'll be right back. We're getting that.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's no worries. We're all good. You're talking about playing an instrument and neural networks.
Yeah, neural networks. Basically, posture it's a neurological habit. Learning to play an instrument is a neurological habit. The more we practice it, the more hardwired that becomes. And so with our older patients that have been practicing this weak posture, this bad gait for years and years and years, that they have recruited muscles that aren't normally involved in that process, and that becomes hardwired into the system. So they lose that balance, that coordination, that fine motor control as a result. But the good news is that the brain wants to learn new stuff. And so if we create a new environment for the feet and we change those reflexes, we can override those old patterns and take the pressure off of a knee, off of a hip, off of L5 disc, off of the C5 disc, and everywhere else.
That's really exciting. I mean, I'm trying to look for the right word. So posture is the shadow of movement.
Yeah.
But posture is a neurological input. Now, I know you said something before. Do your joints move appropriately? What do you mean by that? Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, there are normal ranges of motion. And I guess, again, the big thing I look for is symmetry. So when I see somebody walking, sometimes they've got one arm that swings a lot more than the other one. So we've got a joint or a shoulder, perhaps, that's not moving appropriately. When we get a patient on the table and we evaluate them, we can palpate or feel their spine for areas that are stuck, not moving appropriately. Just, can you turn your head left and right the same amount of distance or number of degrees? So there's a lot of different ways that we can evaluate the body to see if those joints are moving appropriately. But with gait, it's an active process. And everyone that's listening to this, I want you to do this. The next time you see somebody walking down the sidewalk or in the grocery store, in your office, wherever it is, look at their feet. And you're going to see one foot turn out more than the other one. And as they walk, that foot is turned out a little bit more. Well, that knee has to adapt to that. That hip has to adapt to that. And you're not going to be able to look at anybody without seeing a slight imbalance in their gait, in their what we call a foot flare. And that's a big red flag for me. That's a big sign that says, okay, we've got functional movement issues here. And it's kind of funny. And you do this too. We can look at someone, hear a little bit about what's going on, and then start asking them really specific questions. Tell me about your back pain. Well, I didn't tell you I had back pain. How'd you know? Tell me about your headaches. Tell me about your digestive problems. Tell me about your sleep problems. And all of these things are associated with how the nervous system works, how it adapts. Looking at the structural stuff is pretty basic. It's pretty simple, pretty common for us as chiropractors to do. But then you start getting into, the other things, how we deal with stress. Posture is also an indication of how well we deal with stress. So there's a lot to it. And it's a lot of fun to, finally have some time under my belt to see these things and be able to pretty effectively create some solutions for patients to address these things. And since a lot of times they don't even know that they're going on, but they do know that they don't want to have knee replacement surgery. They do know they don't want to have their hips replaced. They do know that they don't want back surgery for a disc problem, but they don't know what to do about it.
So basically, let's go to that foot flare. You see the foot go out, you see the knee go in. So essentially, you're going to be able to connect the joints because we're put together by interconnecting joints. So if the foot goes out one way, the knee will go aberrantly. The hip will compensate for that, cascading throughout the body, ultimately causing, like you said, a spinal issue, poor sleep, inflammatory markers to be secreted in the blood. So musculoskeletal failures, maybe based on a posture and a movement problem, can adversely affect our blood serum levels. Hey, doc, why didn't these markers go down? I'm taking everything, doing everything. And it's
Right.
like you just matched the idea of chiropractic and nutrition together.
Right.
And you have to ask yourself, I know you ask all your patients you want to run with this, are you giving your body nutrients or are you giving your body toxins?
Yeah. People just don't know. We live in a society where we're bombarded with all sorts of information. Much of it is simply not true. It's marketing, it's advertising. And you walk down the aisles of the grocery store and everything says it's healthy. It's got vitamins in it. Well, yeah, big deal. Sugar cereals, it's vitamin packed. It's poison and it's a toxin. It does not feed our body the nutrients that it needs. And so that's one ingredient in this giant cake. I look at the feet, I look at posture, I look at functional movement, I look at the spine, I look at how they adapt to stress, I look at inflammatory markers like you do. And chiropractic is really good about moving the needle with pain without touching any of these other things. And so when someone gets stuck, that's when I start digging a little bit deeper. Okay. Why am I achy all the time? All right. Well, let's do some measuring. Let's look at diet. I'm eating my nutritionist from my medical doctor said that I should use canola oil for all of my cooking. Well, canola oil is one of the most inflammatory oils that's out there. It's just not good information, but people are doing what they're told. They're not doing what they're researching because they don't research. They do what they're told. So it's just one of the ingredients. It's more of an issue for some than others. One example, I had this young lady, probably early 30s. She's a yoga instructor, 5 foot tall, weighs about 95 pounds. I mean, she's just a little itty bitty, but she can barely get out of bed in the morning because her joints are so stiff and so painful. And that's just not normal for someone that age and that size. And so I began to investigate. Tell me about your diet. She says, well, since I was about 10 years old, my sister and I were raised as vegetarians by my parents. So they haven't had anything but plant-based oils, which are generally higher in linoleic acid, which is inflammatory. And so we feed our body food, and it takes that food, breaks it down, and it makes ingredients for the production and the development of new cells. And so we're building new cells with faulty raw materials, with inflammatory raw materials. And so we end up with cells that have more of the linoleic acid in it than the omega-3 fatty acids. And so we're inflamed at the cellular level. So that's the basis of the beginning of it for some. And then let's throw stress and a bunch of cortisol and a bunch of adrenaline and a bunch of other junk into it. And that feeds the inflammation even more, and faulty diet. And it's just a huge component. Okay. I don't use a ton of nutrition in my office, but I try to guide people toward let's look at the foundational stuff. Is what you're consuming, like I said, is it nutrient or is it toxin? And people are unknowingly feeding their body very inflammatory, toxic stuff. They just don't know. And so we've got to educate them as to the process. How does this work? And they need to understand some of the basics of nutrition. Inflammation is just a key factor. David Seaman's been teaching this stuff for 35 years or more. And it's the same message forever, because when you tell the truth, you don't have to make stuff up. It's the same story. So we shifted some things in her diet, got her to start eating more animal protein and supplementing some omega-3 fatty acids and eliminating some of the inflammatory stuff in her diet. And within probably 60 days, we saw huge changes in her blood markers. And it was a phenomenal turnaround. And it becomes pretty predictable after a while, because we're Americans. We live in America. We eat American food. And so it's not a surprise that people are having a hard time maintaining a healthy weight. They're having a hard time not having painful joints. They're having a hard time sleeping well at night. It's everywhere, and everyone is suffering from this stuff. So it's a pretty big target to hit.
I threw up there plant-based foods. You talked about oils, but I am pro plant-based foods, but plant-based foods are omega-6 based. So you've got to have that mixture. You can't. Right. For me, I don't like it. I don't like someone who's just on a plant-based diet. I like it as that component.
Yeah.
So somebody wrote, Roberto said, definitely hemp seed foods. They're also more omega-3 based. So again, remember, plant-based is great. Like Tom Brady does 80% plant-based, 20% protein. And something else you said, which was a huge takeaway that everybody should make note of. You said at the cellular level, when we do blood tests, it's what's in the serum outside the cell. It's important. But you've got to test what's inside the cell.
Yeah, I actually do a blood test that measures the omega complex in the cell membrane of the blood cell. So it's not just serum; it's actually at the cell level. And remember, I'm not saying you can't have any omega-6 fatty acid. We need omega-6 fatty acid, but you have to have a ratio that's healthy, and a healthy ratio is somewhere between 1-to-1 and 4-to-1 of omega-6 to omega-3. So that's actually more omega-6 than omega-3. But the average American is 25-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3.
So essentially what you're saying is you don't have to add any omega-6 foods to your diet. You've got them locked already. Add as many omega-3 foods as you can, and don't get confused between the two. So avocado. I'm a big proponent of avocado. It is now a superfood. And I do think it has its place in virtually everybody's diet. Avocado, believe it or not, is 11-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3. And we need those fats. The problem is, to offset the ratio you just spoke about, what are you doing that morning? Are you taking the nuts? Are you taking the fish oils? What are you taking in conjunction with the avocado, let's say?
Yeah. Again, I think a lot of people don't know where the omega-6 are coming from. We live in America, and we eat a lot of prepackaged foods, and that's just the way it is. And omega-6 fatty acids are in vegetable oils, they're in palm seed oils, they're in all these oils that are used for baked goods, for pre-processed things. And again, it's okay to have a little bit, but a lot of people are getting way too much. The scale is not balanced at all. So you can't just throw a bunch of omega-3 at these ratios as well. You've got to find out, okay, where am I getting too much of this linoleic acid? I think 5 grams a day is considered to be about enough of the omega-6 fatty acids. I haven't figured out exactly what that means in my diet, what 5 grams of those oils are. But there needs to be, let's start with an awareness that what we put in our mouth probably has something to do with it. You live in New York City, a lot of restaurants. A lot of people eat in restaurants there. How's my food prepared? I ordered a steak the other night. I said, I want this steak cooked without any dressings, without any oils. I don't want any of your special sauces. I just want the steak with salt. Can you do that? Yeah, we can do that, because they put all sorts of stuff, all sorts of flavorings, and almost all of them are vegetable oil based. And so you're getting these things in dressings. We don't even think about that, but look at the ingredients of dressings. It's vegetable oil. Okay. There needs to be an awareness, and then a reasonable balancing of our intake of that. And I'm not saying you can't eat stuff that tastes good once in a while, or you can't have dressing on a salad once in a while, but just be aware. Another doctor that I follow a little bit, Dr. Paul Saladino, he says, look, if you're into plant eating and you're thriving on a plant-based diet, continue. If there's something amiss, you've got skin problems, you've got digestive problems, you've got gut problems, you've got these issues, we need to consider the types of foods that we're eating, because some people tolerate avocado way better than others. My wife can't eat avocado. She's allergic to it, essentially. She has a reaction to the plant chemicals that are in avocado. Banana the same way. But other vegetables, no problem. So if you're thriving on what you're eating, keep going. If you're not thriving, that's when we need to dig in a little bit and say, you know what? Some of these plants I don't deal with very well. Some things like kale, the superfood kale, you chew on a little bit of raw kale for a second, you're going to have a reaction in your mouth. And that is a plant chemical reaction that you may or may not be able to tolerate very well. We had a friend who couldn't eat seafood. He's very allergic to seafood. Well, we have chickens and ducks, so we get fresh eggs. And he ate some of our duck eggs, and he had a seafood reaction. It's like, oh, well, those ducks are eating little snails and little little salamanders and little fish and things like that. So they've got a lot of that omega-3 fatty acid in them as well, and it shows up in their eggs. So there's got to be an awareness. We have to fess up to the fact that my actions might be contributing to some of my health problems, and they might be food related. They might be, other activity related, but we've got to bring balance into this whole inflammation equation. And part of that's our diet. Part of it is definitely nutritional supplementation. Nutritional supplementation is designed to basically provide what we're deficient in. and it's easy to be deficient in certain nutrients eating a typical American diet.
Without question. That's why the acronym is SAD, Standard American Diet. I think we have the most deficient diet in the industrialized world. And we can talk about diet all day. And I do believe for everybody, diet is the standard and the starting point in lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
Again, everybody knows that 75% of Americans are overweight or obese, 12% are metabolically healthy. We consume way too much sugar, way too much wheat, way too much artificial sweeteners, toxin chemicals, and the like. With all that being put together, how is your nervous system able to adapt to these environmental toxins?
Well, again, it adapts according to what it's exposed to the most. And one of the big issues is the adaptation in how it affects us nutritionally. Is I did EEG studies in my practice for about 8 years. I did brainwave studies. And what we observed doing brainwave studies of your typical American patient is that most of our brains are stuck in the fight or flight reflex. Okay. And I think everyone probably has an idea what fight or flight is. Okay. We've got fight or flight, rest and digest. Fast nervous system is fight or flight. Slow nervous system is rest and digest. Your brain has to slow down and make slow brain waves to sleep, to get into that healing repair state. Okay. That's when we make vitamin D, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When most people's brains are stuck in this elevated brainwave state, this beta brainwave frequency, when we're running from a bear or from a cab in New York City or whatever, our chemistry changes, our physiology changes. We produce a bunch of adrenaline and a bunch of cortisol. We get a big dump of cholesterol as well. That's part of fight or flight. We turn off all these automatic processes that are not important for momentary survival. We inhibit digestion. That means we make less hydrochloric acid. We inhibit immune system function. Viruses and bacteria are not important when we're running from a bear. Our blood supply is changed. It goes from the periphery to internal to the core. And so we have less peripheral vascular flow. Our brain blood flow changes. Our prefrontal cortex, the blood flow in the prefrontal cortex is shifted to the hindbrain where we act reflexively. Mm-hmm. So we've inhibited digestion, we've inhibited sleep, we've inhibited nutrition, we've inhibited our ability to act cognitively. we act reflexively. And I think that being stuck in this routine, again, what fires together, wires together, these physiological processes become the environment of the patient. So now we can start talking about a lack of hydrochloric acid production in the stomach. Well, now we're susceptible to the bacteria-caused ulcers and to just general digestive distress, faulty bowel function, and just on and on and on. So it's all part of the big question. I don't know that there's a specific thing that artificial sugar neurologically incompatible with us anyway, but I don't know that there's a specific thing that some of these individual ingredients do to our nervous system, but it's just part of this big overall function of the nervous system and how we adapt to our environment, how we respond to stress. Do we speed up neurologically when it's appropriate, and do we slow down when it's appropriate? And the fight or flight reflexes causes our hands to get kind of cold and clammy. That's one of the things I notice in patients. I'll shake their hand for the first time, and I'll have this cold, clammy hand. I know their nervous system is stuck in fight or flight. So then I start asking questions. Tell me about all of these problems that you have related to these effects of this reflex. And it's so predictable. I always have indigestion. I always get reflux. I always have bad reactions to food. That's because their nervous system has not adapted appropriately. And chiropractic care does an awful lot to slow that brain down to bring us back into that parasympathetic dominant state where the body can do what it's supposed to do. And we just live in a wild time. We're just bombarded with information all the time. These crazy podcasts that are all the time. Always looking at our computers and our phones. I mean, there's a lot of great information out there. I know mine just went off too.
How they text and how they get questions. It's funny. Somebody just asked a question. They said that they really enjoyed the podcast to date. They wanted to know if you could give them the hard-boiled egg analogy again.
Yeah. When we're young and pliable and flexible and active, we don't have much of a care in the world, but due to structural imbalances, which accelerate degeneration, and it causes joints to respond to those abnormal stresses. The body produces inflammatory responses. We get calcification responses in ligaments, cartilage deteriorates, discs dehydrate. The body changes over time. Okay, we shrink, we get shorter. A lot of that's dehydration of the discs over time. 24 discs that get a millimeter thinner, 24, that's an inch. Okay. And so you just think about the dehydration aspect of the discs. If our posture is abnormal, we're loading those discs with abnormal forces. Okay. And this guy this morning, 62 years old, doesn't walk very good. He's got foot flares. He's got arthritis in his knees and his neck, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell people, look, we're not going to undo all that wear and tear. You can't unboil a hard-boiled egg, but you can stop cooking it. And so from a chiropractic standpoint, I'm going to say, okay, where can I intercede and where can I affect this guy's body? Where can I affect his neurology? Where can I affect his nutrition? And so I can help him achieve better function over time by addressing some of these things that are obvious to us. Okay. The goal isn't to undegenerate a disc or a knee joint. We can't do that. But if I can give it function, if I can help it obtain some nutrients, we can help a knee joint get a little bit better. We may not be able to avoid the replacement 10 years down the road, but I maybe can help him have 10 years of high function before we need some kind of a medical intervention like that. And I think that's available to almost every single one of our patients, regardless of age. You've had patients that were centurions, I'm sure, as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've had
parents are in their 90s now.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was a great summation of what chiropractic should be. And if we wanted to define it, what we do inside the office.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have asked, how can they get in touch with you?
My email address is Dr. Jensen, DrJensen, at cavespringchiropractic.com.
And you'll put that in the notes when we're done.
Yeah. You're
Notes.
welcome to email me. I'm happy to respond to those. I travel a lot. I speak a lot, and I'm amazed at how few emails I get from people, which is, but I'm very happy to respond to emails and share some resources with you, and just answer any question you might have.
Oh, they'll email you. I promise you. I can vouch for that. They'll email you all through the night. No doubt about it. They'll email you. Well, Dr. Brian Jensen, this has been my pleasure. It was extremely informative. I know today you're treating patients, so you took a little break just to share some great insights. I do appreciate that. I hope that you're able to come back again. I look forward to
Yeah,
seeing you on the road at one of the next up and coming symposiums. I'm
absolutely.
Terrific. I'm
All
Dr.
right.
Rob Silverman. It's Dr. Brian Jensen, Proven Health Alternatives. Dr. Rob, once again, always yours in health.